Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive!
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
My God, it's full of stars.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm fine, but just don't look at me. Don't look at me.
Is that why you've got the towel over your head?
Yes, and if you hear slurping sounds, pay no mind.
Yeah, and if ladies and gentlemen, if you hear in the background, there might be a faint buzzing or a "help me." Just please ignore it, and we shall carry on. Today we are doing another one in our series of sort of revisiting something we've done in the past, but like another aspect of it. We've done sequels, we've done remakes, and now we are revisiting sort of like the original something. So we are going to be talking about The Fly from 1958. For me, I'm sneaking another Vincent Price film into the onto the show, so I'm always pleased with that. But yeah, this stars. I'll quickly run up some of the cast because Vinny isn't the top build. We've got David Hedison, Patricia Owens, Vincent Price, Herbert Marshall. They're really the main ones. Then you get sort of like Kathleen Freeman as the help, and Charles Herbert as Philippe is probably worth noting. But yes, this is directed by Kurt Newman. And actually, I wanted to note something based on the story by George Langeland. Now, I never knew that The Fly was based on a story from the year before, 1957. It was published in Playboy magazine. Which is like a bizarre place, but that's what happened in those days.
Well, I mean, Playboy ran real stories.
Yeah,
it wasn't all silly stuff.
boobs. No. So yeah. So anyway, so this is the story of. We've talked about obviously the 1986 version or the 1987 version, starring Jeff Goldblum. 1986, starring Jeff Goldblum, directed by David Cronenberg. This is a different animal. However, no less horrific, I would say, in some cases. However, this is the story of Professor his name Andre Delembray, Delembray, who is a scientist, and he's working on teleportation. And much like Brundle, he ends up teleporting himself, but a fly gets trapped in the machine with him. But instead of slowly turning into a fly, Andre finds that his arm and his head have become that of a fly, and he is slowly losing his humanity. However, there is also a fly out there somewhere with a human head and a human arm that is gaining its humanity. And so that is the story of how he deals with that and what happens. I thought we'll get into the sort of the spoilers shortly, but overall, Julian, what were your initial thoughts then of The Fly?
I think it's slow to start.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly the performances, especially Patricia Owens as Ellen, are fine and sort of carry it forward. I do quite like the flashback structure, and I do like. I mean, I think this is quite a fine film, and I've not seen it before. I do love the mystery. It's a sort of murder mystery. It's a very strange case, right?
Yeah.
Somebody, Ellen has killed her husband under a press, an industrial press, right? And he has apparently laid down to be crushed. It's been activated twice.
I love
apparently.
that fact. Yeah.
Which makes it seem quite in cold blood. She's very happy at this. She doesn't seem to be upset at all. And then she's obsessed when flies buzz around, and then cries when one is swatted.
Yeah.
And so it's like, is she mad? What's going on? Obviously, there's more to this story. So it is this sort of mystery, and I think that's very effective. That's a very smart sort of way to do a science fiction film, because oftentimes in these films, we get to this point where things have been screwed up, messed up things have happened, and perhaps because we've walked through it in sequential order, we realize how absurd it is by the point that, people have been murdered and whatnot. It's like, yeah, did it have to go this way? But if you start with that, and then the rest of it rolls out as a flashback, and then you pick up, that's become quite popular, especially post Palahniuk and Fight Club. It's almost become a cliche to start with. There's been a death, and but it's a very effective thing, especially with science fiction, that makes you think, oh, what is really going on here? Of course, you and we know, right? It's not no big mystery, but it really is very effective.
Yes, it is, and I like the fact, because you say about it is there's a portion that is quite slow at the beginning, but it's interspersed with it keeps throwing you off the trail a little bit. So it does start with the murder of Andre by his wife Hélène, and I like the fact that it's all sort of set up so there's like a caretaker or some guy who comes into the factory, he hears the press. And he obviously eventually sees the body sort of just laying out of this thing, and reports it to the police. And it's obviously Vincent Price plays the brother, plays Francois. Francois Delabray. And when they identify him and stuff, but I like the fact that they're looking at the machine and they're like, well, we saw Hélène has been there. She's been recognised as being there. But well, she doesn't know how to work this thing. Like, why would she use it? And there's a stroke count, they call it. There's two things. There's like the press count, which is like how low it goes, and it's down to 0. So it's like, it would completely destroy anything that's in there. They make that point, and then just before he leaves, it's like the stroke count's at 2, and the detective's like, well, what does that mean? It's like, this was raised and done again. And so even for 1958, I'm like, that is brutal. Like, if you were coming into this, you are like, what is going on?
It's CSI Montreal, right?
Yes.
I mean, these days it would have, sort of like post Law and Order, like, she must have had a real reason to get rid of her husband. I'd say a very pressing reason.
Oh, that is such a myth pun. That in a Vincent Price film, that should have really happened. But I like that, like you said, when she's met, like she's, they go to see her and she does seem calm, and she, they're questioning her sanity and stuff, and she's presenting as, she's not denying what she's done. She's saying, no, I killed my husband, but I'm not a murderess. Like, oh, I'm completely aware of what I've done. It's just the motivations and the events aren't what you think. And then she hears the fly. Like, she's sat, I think, with the housekeeper. And then it's that sort of those moments where you're like, oh, she must be mad, because now she's following a fly around and she's sort of like, protecting it, and all those little bits. So that, you just keep getting these little things, which I really like. I just think it's really, although it's slow, I like the fact that there's no answer to at first. They are going to like make you wait until she sort of lays out the flashback. Because you're right, if this is all done in chronological order, this would be almost like a really daft B movie. But the way it's done, it's a much better B movie.
Yeah, that's quite true. I mean, and of course we would be sort of very bored for much of the film, because we get through the good stuff, and then you'd get to the climax of the press, and then you'd have a whole second act, which was like, following her around. Is she crazy or not? And then you'd get to the sort of denouement of the resolution that we have in the same order here. But and I think that second act works reasonably well too. Of course, it's a little silly. You don't know where that cat goes. This
Yes.
cat disappears and
Yeah.
he's sort of in another dimension or something, and you hear him meow, meow around the room. And there's the sort of like usual phony baloney talk about like, I always think about Ed Wood saying, if men were meant to fly, we'd have been born with wings. And if, well, someday they'll say the same thing about gravitational transport across solar systems. What the hell are you talking about? But I mean, it's the same sort of like Arthur C. Clarke's worst quote
Yeah.
ever, about magic and
The magic and
advanced
science.
technology.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of that nonsense about the TV, but it's TV transmission. But it's also like you can understand how, especially at that time, when this was a relatively new thing, it really wasn't, right? The roots of TV go back decades from 1958, but still, it felt like a new thing. Well, why can't we transmit atoms? They're just electron. Well, that makes a certain kind of sense.
Yeah. I like it. It reaches a comfortable middle ground for me in that sort of we're not going to bombard you with technical scientific gobbledygook. I'm not going to try and break it down into some sort of like ridiculous thing that's going to sort of get itself tied in knots. But I'm also not going to pass over it. I'm going to give you just enough so you just go, all right, like he does. He talks about how to our touch, he has that plate or the saucer. To you and I, this feels solid. And he sort of like knocks on it and stuff. And then, but he says, but actually, just like you and I, this thing is made up of atoms and it's just an electrical bond and so on and so forth. And so it's just enough for you to go, yeah, that makes sense. And he's like, yeah, I'm going to break that bond, send it all somewhere else, and then reconstruct that bond. And you go, fine, okay. It's enough to be like, I get the gist of what it is you're doing. I don't, like you said, I don't believe it. But the more you explain something, sometimes the less you can invest in
Believable
it.
it becomes.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I quite like the dish being inverted, right? It's with the sort of made in Japan, which is funny that that's a mark of cheapness. Clearly, in 1958, and today it would be like, oh, that means it's very expensive. It made in China, or something else would be, the equivalent today. But it's nice to see how it's inverted and how that's done, this sort of celebration, and then Ellen realizes, oh, wow, it's got this little fault. But then that's never really explained, right?
No.
It's not really clear how, why the cat disappeared. I mean, all we know is that this is dangerous somehow, and there are things he doesn't understand. I mean, I agree with you about the technology and the level of explication that we get, but I also feel like that starts to fall apart as he makes statements like, well, I don't even understand how it works. I don't understand why. It's like, well, you fucking should before you're putting people through this.
Yeah, or even your cat, to be perfectly honest. I mean, there's a real Andre is an odd character, and the way he's portrayed is kind of odd. The relationship with his wife, where she's sort of like, at one point, like Vincent Price's Francois comes over and he's like, oh, do you know where Andre is? Oh, she says, I've hardly seen him for 2 weeks. Yet they seem to have this sort of like loving, supportive relationship. Yet she acknowledges like he just disappears into this basement for like weeks on end. Doesn't want to parent. Well, no, neither of them want to parent their kid. Like, that's left totally to their help. But there's this sort of like they still have this relationship. And so I'm like, okay, you're supposed to be this sort of like obsessed, dedicated scientist. Like he does it again with that scene with the plate, doesn't it? With the saucer. When Helen identifies that the made in Japan is backwards, he doesn't really say anything. He just goes back and sits down and starts writing notes. And then obviously, they go to the ballet, and she catches him writing more equations and notes. And so he's supposed to be this sort of like obsessed scientist.
Sort of stereotype of.
Yeah. And so, and even using the cat, would be sort of that thing of like, oh, he's just willing to use the family cat because it's, there's a callousness to that, like it's just there to be used. However, the guy who's playing him plays him in such a sort of jovial, sort of like, David Hedison plays him in such a sort of fatherly kind of sort of, way that everything he is portraying, all these traits, all this sort of stuff, he's actually doing. I'm like, oh, you're a terrible parent and you're a terrible husband. Like, this is just, but yet everyone sort of like seems to be like, la, 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 this is all good. And I was like, oh, yeah, that bit, I was just like, oh, okay, you're sort of going to let him off. Like she says, when he does kill the cat, I mean, the cat's dead. Like, it's not coming back. It's like, I don't know where it is. She's like, well, you've got to make me promise that you will never, test on animals again. And he's like, yeah. Not, you've literally just killed our cat. Like,
well, she's the stereotype of the supportive wife, right? Of the 50s, I mean, my mother aspired to be that, just sort of like, I have married a great man and my job is to support him. And, yes, he neglects me. Of course, he neglects the children, but that's the price you pay to be married to a great man. And it's my job to put tea and crumpets outside his door, or have the maid do it.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah. My job is to tell the maid to go feed my husband. That's the role. I'm always baffled by. Yeah, I'm always baffled by these things. It seems to be a trope I see in some of these films is the help as well. Like she's a minor part of this film. Like she doesn't really she plays a minor part overall in some of the scenes, but I'm still like, oh, this family can afford help. When they have like a live-in house.
Quite rich. I mean, this is quite a nice house.
Yeah.
And in fact, Vincent Price says when he goes down into the basement, he says, like, I've only been allowed in this lab like 3 times, and each time I made a fortune. It's like, no, this is big business.
Yeah.
He's Reed Richards or something.
Yeah, and that's it. But one of the things I'm good, they say that because obviously they've got this metal press or this factory that's like right next to the house. Like it's backed onto the house basically, and so I understand that they own this business, and so there's this sort of thing. But I'm never entirely sure what the business does. And that scene where he does say about making the money, I'm like, cool, show me something he's done. Show me something that's successful. Like what has he invented that's, maybe he invented the press that eventually kills him. Like, he actually constructed it and it's now more efficient than any other press in the world or something. I don't know, but it's just no,
I had the same question. Like, why is there this industrial press there?
Yeah.
We're told it's a factory and I'm willing to let that go at the beginning. But exactly as you point out, at those moments, I start wondering, right, well, what were those other 3 inventions? Yeah. They don't seem related to the field that he is experimenting with, right? I mean, so, I can't imagine what they would be that you would need a press. It doesn't seem as if there's vats of chemicals or anything lying around. He's also not a chemist. What would he possibly have invented? It's a neat idea that he's this sort of like reclusive guy who, if you're let into his lab, there's, something big afoot, right? That's cool. It's a sort of stereotype, but, right. But I mean, it would be far more interesting to sort of flesh that out.
Yeah. Well, this comes to the point of, when you have these sort of mad scientists or these science characters, and like, I'm a scientist. Okay, in what discipline? Science.
Yes.
No, like physics, chemistry, biology. Like, what are you a scientist of? What discipline? Science.
Never you mind.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
I'm a scientist. I study the world.
That's
and
it. Yeah,
all
yeah.
of the things that God has left unanswered. Don't
That's
you
it.
know?
Yeah. I'm a student of all the disciplines. And you go, oh, all right, fair enough. I'm not going to. We're back
Right.
to
Well, what that means is the scriptwriter has no idea.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. We're back to Doctor Cyclops territory, where it's like radiation. And you go, okay, is that what you do? I'm a radiation scientist. Fair enough.
Well, that at least is a field within
That's
science.
true.
I'm not sure how it relates to shrinking things, but those radioactive rays could do a lot in the 40s and 50s.
That's true. They were very useful back then. Yeah. So you're right. There's this thing about what is funding all this, because he also sort of at one point he says something about Francois coming over, and he's asked for some more equipment, and it's just like, there you go,
Mm-hmm.
all yours. And I was like, wow, this guy's really got his back. Like Vincent Price has really got his back. He just seems to be given whatever he wants. So they must be making money somehow.
Yes.
But yeah, it's fine. The family's all set up.
Well, let's circle back to this idea that you were bringing up about his character, and I think you're right that he's presented as this sort of mad scientist, or at least a obsessional scientist who obviously completely neglects his wife and completely neglects his child, but he also is depicted as he's played by David Hedison, who plays him as this sort of genial guy. I mean, in this sort of classic, like attractive, sort of I'm distracted. I mean, he takes his wife out to see the a dance, right?
Yes, the ballet. Yeah.
Yeah, the ballet, and he's outside of being distracted in that sort of stereotypical way. He's handsome, he's charming, he knows how to woo her a little bit. He's not you can see somebody sort of falling for this guy. He's a kind of classic leading man sort of type, and then except he's also experimenting on animals and killing them, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that, to sort of tie that together, one thing that I found very interesting, the way that he addresses the problem once he's been fly-eyed.
Right. Yeah.
The way that he spares her from the sight. He's also sparing us from the expense of seeing
effects.
it, but of the effect. And also, it's more effective to have it held back and then revealed, right? But okay, fine. He's compassionate towards his wife, while also totally demanding about what she does. You must step 3 feet forward and put this specific item on the table, and do not ask me or stare at me at all. He's obviously very used to being demanding, but he has this compassionate side, and he is so quick to want to destroy himself. He seems like he's very responsible in that sense, if you can call that responsible. I mean, it seems as if, and what the movie wants us to think is that he's really gone too far. We've all seen Frankenstein. This is a case of just science has gone too far, and nobody must ever use this, except, watch for contamination next time, buddy.
Yeah, this is the thing, isn't it? Sort of the solution to some of these problems are actually incredibly easy. Sort of, they say just don't do it. It's the sort of what's the thing, like the knee jerk reaction to it as well. Like, this is the worst case scenario. But I also like his other response, because, like you say, he about him wanting to destroy himself, and this idea of sort of taking oneself out and destroying all of his records, and he eventually does do that. But his first solution is to find the fly and to redo the experiment. And Helene, his wife, sort of like, obviously agrees, and she sort of suggests him, I'll go through it again and get the fly and go through it again. Maybe it'll sort you out. And you can, it didn't. It combined them before. It's not going to unseparate them perfectly
Yeah.
Again, like it doesn't work like that. Like, and this where it sounds silly, but like he goes with it, it's fine.
It's worth a try, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
he's
yeah. At
clearly
this
on a
point,
path to self-destruction.
yeah.
Yeah.
But I kind of sort of read it this because I've watched it from a couple of times, but this was the first time in seeing that where he agrees to it. It's almost like he's like, as you said, like, yeah, I might as well. Like, there's nothing else to do. Like, he's not. It's not like he's going, well, that's a really valid solution. It is a sort of a, all right. Well, if you can find that fly with the little white head and the funny arm, then let's give it a go. We'll see what happens. It doesn't feel like he's going, that is the solution, which is how I've sort of taken it before. So yeah, I don't know. It's this thing of we had this discussion when we talked about the 1986 version with Brundlefly, this idea of the obsessed scientist and sort of thing, and obviously Jeff Goldblum plays it slightly differently. But the other thing that he says, he has this thing about insect politics in the 1986 version, and how sort of like, there are no lawyers, there's no politicians, there's just the animal thing, there's the lack of humanity, and it's really sort of like explored a bit more in that film. It's this idea of what is it am I becoming. But it's here as well. But it's sort of you can, and I like the fact that he is fighting it, and there's a whole section where he's sort of like, I can feel that the strange. The way he describes it, quite funny, I can feel strange thoughts. There are strange feelings coming into me, and it's sort of like the fly is taking over.
I quite like that. I mean, I
like
quite
that,
like that
yeah.
that type stuff. And I think it's fascinating. And sort of like it does put the pedal to the metal as far as like his need to kill himself.
Yeah.
And this idea of sort of losing your sanity, losing your mind to this animal presence, right? I mean, except, of course, it's not much of an animal. It is a metaphor for like the animal inside us. It's like all of us have an evil predator inside us named a fly. Nah, not very threatening to me. But yeah, I do like that. Although I am confused about if his head is that of a fly, why does he have so much of his humanity? Why does that ebb away?
I agree. This was a problem for me because where's his brain?
Yeah, right. I mean, clearly his brain is partially fly, partially him. I have no idea. But then you think it probably wouldn't function very adequately. And then the other thing is, this ridiculous. I mean, actually, there have been cases of people who do this in real life, who suffer a traumatic brain injury that separates the hemispheres. And one hand will sort of do things that are involuntary, and they'll fight with each other. But this sort of ridiculous thing of, one hand grasping the other hand and fighting the other hand. And then the fly...
the Doctor Strangelove effect.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yeah. Resisting the Nazi, although it's much funnier in Strangelove.
Yeah.
It's intended for comedic effect. And and why is the fly? The fly seems aware of what he's doing and wants to like erase the board. Like understands English. Clearly. Seems outright evil. That doesn't seem accurate, right?
No, it's almost like when. Because you eventually see, and we'll get to the end, at the very end of the punchline, if you will. But when you do see the fly, the actual fly, like the little mini house fly, and it has the human face and the human arm, and it's going, help me! It's learnt to speak, like it can speak, and it's asking for help. One of the things that sort of I was interested in this time. And it's a stupid. I know how. Before I even say it, I know how stupid this sounds. So when he throws the cat goes through, and then he sort of like looks mystified, and you hear a meow in the atmosphere, and sort of like I'm like, how does that happen? Like it's atomized. It hasn't got vocal cords. That's ridiculous. But I had this idea. I was like, okay, it's out in the ether, and so I was like, okay, well if these two things are blended together, like in the 86 version it blends them completely, like it's a complete mishmash and becomes a whole new entity. But I was like, okay, well, if this is a 50s sci-fi film, I'm taking it almost as in like there's an inversion, sort of like almost like almost like a transfer of humanity. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like as the fly takes over the human, because that's where the head is. As the fly takes over the sort of like the human body, the Andre we see the laboratory. At the same time, the Andre is appearing in the fly.
Mm-hmm.
I almost wanted. I'd almost want to see. I don't know how you would do it. I'd almost want to see more of that. So there's this, like a little fly with a human head, sort of like, starts off like eating poop, and it's just like, and then it's like, oh, it's disgusting. What am I doing? And then becoming more and more, the humanity becoming more evident in that little blue bottle or little housefly. And so there's almost like that inversion of sort of like that humanity, and I'd like that. That is how I'd take it, and it's that the push and pull between the two, that's causing this sort of this conflict. That's not what's in the film, but that's how I wanted to take it.
Yeah, I found myself wondering about that too, and sort of wondering what the fly's half of that journey was like. It does seem as if as it is. Yeah, I mean, we are speculating that it is sort of becoming more human as the scientist is becoming more fly-like. That's utter speculation on our part. Having said that, I mean, obviously it's logical, and I find myself wondering, like, has it been following Ellen around? I mean, it seems as if it has.
And Francois, it appears on his desk.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, is that him wanting to be with his family? Obviously, it puts him at risk. I mean, what has this been like? And yeah, I mean, you could go for, the sort of eating poop sort of stuff. But you could also go for sort of like, how do I communicate with my family? How do I, get them to understand? My God, I mean, how does he respond to realizing that Ellen has murdered his other body and there's no going back, right?
Yeah.
But the movie can't do that because, and I love the way it's structured, right? I love the murder mystery and then this reveal and then this denouement that has its own twist at the end, right? It's all very good. I'm quite happy with it. But because of that choice, you cannot then, I mean, think about how unsatisfying it would be
exactly,
if at the end it's like, right, he got smashed. Well, let's flash back to, like as I lay dying in the spider web, here's my version.
Yeah, there's a Pixar film waiting to be made about that though. That's what's the Fly story. No, you're right, because you need that the reveal at the end to be as horrific as it is. And it is. I mean, that we'll get to it, but that ending is proper, like, proper brutal and but fascinating. But yeah,
as is the other fly, right? As is the other combination.
Oh yeah,
right.
both.
I mean, it's a real monster.
Oh yeah, the ending of both, the sort of demise of it both is well, they both get crushed.
The
as
reveals,
well.
right?
Yeah. But the thing I like is what was I say is this idea it is brought up that this fly is in the house. They keep referring to it as the fly with the little white head. And that you see it sort of dotted around. So they must have caught a fly and put like Tipex on it or something.
Yes.
But it's there. It's in the house. So to me, yeah, there's definitely an element of it sticking around. And it going out into the garden is obviously, to me, there's a moment where they're in the sort of like the living room. They've been told to look for this fly, and the little boy Philippe has got his net. And stuff, and they're trying to catch this fly, and for a brief second they do, and it gets caught behind the curtains, and there's a crack in the window, and it sort of zips outside, and that's it. Then that sort of seems to be. But
how does that window get cracked? I thought it was already cracked.
Oh, it is. There's a whole like corner piece missing, which
Why
I'm
the
like,
fuck do they have a window with a cracked corner?
I love the fact it's such a sort of plot device, because like the rest, as you said, we've talked about how wealthy they are and clearly how sort of like how immaculate the rest of the house is, apart from this one convenient pane of glass. And again, it's one of those stupid things where there's such an easy, sensible solution to this. You know, where somebody walks in the front door and the door's open and it just zips out the floor out the front door. Like, you don't need to be like, this whole convoluted thing with the glass and stuff. It's but it's
Among the things that I am most puzzled by, or that I feel are most out of sync with reality in this film, surely very high on that list has to be how easy it is to catch flies in this movie. Now, I remember one of the things that actually, when I first went to Europe, shocked me the most was A, how big the flies were, especially on the continent, and B, that they were slow. You could actually swat them. And on the American continent, good luck, right? I mean, maybe I've seen people with a fly swatter get lucky once or twice. There is no point to having that device. You're better off like spraying chemicals or something, because at least you can do it from a distance and they won't see it coming. But I mean, nobody can. How the hell are they catching flies? Let alone that kid catching like 20 in a jar or something.
I was gonna say, I love the fact he's got a jar of them. Yeah,
it's so easy for them.
Yeah,
so bizarre.
It is. It's a very sort of, again, it's that sort of, it's a sort of like a plot device, isn't it, just to keep it going. It's quite funny when the kid comes in with this like jar full of flies, and I'm just like, wow,
what are they doing? What?
Yeah, you've spent a good afternoon down by sort of like the compost heap. Like, I don't know what the point of this is.
I mean, that might be true of like a moth. You can catch moths like that. I mean, I just find that baffling. It's like, have you ever seen a fly? If you're gonna make a movie.
But yeah, no, I agree. That bit does make me chuckle when the kids sort of ring around with his butterfly net trying to capture flies. But like you say, it's this thing of like, I would like to know. Well, no, I wouldn't want to know. Now you're right, because the more I think about it, like I wouldn't want the end reveal and the end twist to be spoiled. I want that, but it's clearly indicated like there's a reversal. There's been a switch, and you're just not going to get to see it. But what I do want to talk about actually is about the reveal that we get, and I want to talk about the fly special effects. Now, as you say, it's kept hidden for the most part. It wears like a towel or a piece of material over his head, and keeps his hand in his pocket, so you don't see things for a long time. Now, when it is revealed, firstly the arm, and you see the hand, and it's like a claw kind of thing. But it is like the bottom of a fly's leg. It's it looks very good. I was quite impressed with it, actually. And then the reveal of the head, it's not going to scare me in any way, shape, or form. But like, it's actually really good. I'm not sure if it's color. Did you watch this in color or black and white? Was yours in
color?
It is color, yeah. Because the colours, they've got like the greeny sort of emerald-looking eyes, and the fly head is that black and blue sort of like, it's got that hue, and it's got all the bits and pieces and the proboscis and all this other stuff. Like, it's a good-looking headpiece that they've created, and I like that the effect of having it's revealed, like she screams, and then you go to the fly eye view of the many of her sort of screaming. Is really well done. I mean, it's I actually really enjoy that whole sort of the reveal scene.
Yeah, I do too, and I of course think immediately this is not how flies perceive, but who cares? I'm totally willing to justify it because it's so effectively done, right? And the point is, I mean, we'll see a lot of this, whether it's like Terminator or other sort of attempts to depict what it's like for some sort of alien presence, right, or other animal. Well, that and that's the point, right? Is that it's just very different. Yeah. So, and I think that reveal is very effective. And she screams a bit. I mean, the screams are kind of a weak part of this movie. I mean, the scream by the assistant, the worker at the death is sort of so poorly edited that it seems as if it's delayed by like 20 seconds.
It's supposed to like blend into something else, doesn't it? But it's like, say it's so badly done, it doesn't really work, which is quite funny.
And so her scream is much better at discovering her husband has a fly in his head. And yeah, the more you see it, the more it looks like, right, that's a mask. But it is, I think it is very effective. I quite like the reveal scene and her scream and that perspective shot.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's one of those moments you get in a film, isn't it? With these things, I mean, make or break. Like, if they revealed it and it looked awful, and then she reacted like that, and you sort of go, oh, okay, well, And obviously, you see this in some films, don't you? That they'll reveal like a monster, or they'll reveal something that's supposed to be horrifying, and you go, it just doesn't look good. Like, it's or it's especially worse when it's sort of really poor CGI and it's clearly sort of like separate from the environment it's in, and you're like, oh well, that's a shame. But to me, I mean, this is tactile. It's a mask. It is physically there, like it's it's been done, and we always seem to appreciate that more. But yeah, I just like it, and then obviously she faints. Like I say, the only thing that kind of ruins it, doesn't ruin, but it kind of affects, is that sort of the two arms fighting to do different things, but during that time, which looks daft. But I like the fact that, like, this is where he makes that decision. Like, her reaction is the final sort of nail in the coffin. Like, he knew that there was no real way back, kind of thing. But then to have her sort of like scream and faint is him going like, oh well, yeah, this is me done now. We've got to sort of stop this. That's when he starts to destroy all the machinery and his notes and all that sort of stuff. So the decision is made.
Yeah. I mean, I know it's a trope. I know he's got to destroy the machinery. And again, I like the film. I am just puzzled by, you don't have to do this, man. And this, I mean, he makes that speech about how important this is in the history of humanity. Like, we're going to be able to transport food, right? I mean, the cost of transportation and the dangers involved obviously are a huge part of what civilization has struggled with, and we continue to struggle with. But making those costs, transportation, cheaper and more more efficient and more effective, less dangerous, has been the key to a global economy, right?
Yeah,
that's why we have avocados in winter. Of course, as a white man in of my age in America, that's the first thing I think of, right? I know I'm a cliche, but the most important part of the global economy, my fucking avocados. But I mean, it's a miracle, and so he understands what this could mean for human history, and he even talks about space colonies. So he's thinking about the future, like, look, we're gonna, you can have a colony. He doesn't quite go this far, but we can have a colony on the moon or have a colony on Mars. Teleport some oxygen over there, teleport some food over there. They can teleport their waste back. You suddenly don't have to terraform anything. Like, this is amazing. But then he's like, right, yeah, I'm not happy that like an animal could get in there, a fly could get in there. So, screw it. I'm just going to demolish all of this. Fuck humanity.
Well, yeah, it is a sort of this reaction, but that's the point, is this blind reaction. But you're right, like they say, there's that sort of cost benefit where, really, like, firstly, it's his own fault because he rushed it, much like Brundle. That's sort of the point. But there's clearly a solution to this. Because the other thing is, this is the one thing, the one way this always falls down. And I think we may have even said this with 86 version is we have living things living on us and in us all the time.
Yeah. I was going to bring this up, that this is something that really bothered me, about the remake.
Yeah.
It's like we have, now we understand, like, our microbiome makes decisions for us. It's responsible for allergies. It's responsible for basic, our cravings of foods and, what foods make us sick. Whether we have intestinal disturbances from one food or cravings for another. I mean, not to mention there's bacteria on everything. Why does the machine, interpolate a fly as a problem, but not, I mean, the milk that the cat was drinking was organic.
Yeah.
Why is it not combining the cat with the milk? Maybe it did. I mean,
yeah, but why is it only organic matter? Is it a deal? Because then obviously he said that the plate through is one thing, but again the plate's made up of different things. It could be like clay or porcelain, then paint, and so on and so forth. But he sends through like a bottle of champagne and glasses. I'm like, okay, well that's a bottle, that's tin foil, whatever over the top of it. That's champagne inside. That's 2 crystallized glasses.
Mm-hmm.
Should that not come out as one big, mess and massive things? Like, I don't know. How does that work?
Well, it's this problem in the way we conceptualize things, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we think to us that is a cat, that's milk, that's a separate glass, right? That's, we have to see it that way, but that's not the way it really is.
Mm.
What's confusing is the way in which that does seem to be the case in some ways. You can move that glass around, and we know its atoms are, its molecules are, tied together, right? So that's what defines its unity. And yet, it's very strange, this concept of identity and where one object stops, where I end and you begin, or I end and the table begins. It's very strange to me.
Well, because the other thing as well is we talk about living things, and so we make that comparison between organic and inorganic. But the other thing to think about, like, if he'd had a fish dinner just before he went and got into that thing, like, would he come out? Would he come out as a fish? Like,
yeah, or he's got a cow hoof, and he's like, what's happened here? Oh, right, I had that burger.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, it's it's this thing about the science again, isn't it? Sort of, you don't want to explain it too much because it starts to unravel very, very quickly. Which is why these things aren't possible. That's why teleportation most likely isn't possible, because of these sorts of, we now learn more and more about, let's say, the more microbiotic environment and how things work. But yeah, maybe it's, I don't know. But
I mean, the other thing is that in both this and the remake, and I rather like the sort of old timey computer bank behind it with the lights going. It looks pretty good, but with both, there's this sort of like suggestion. It's more apparent in the remake, right? That the computer, what is that computer doing? That computer, what it should be doing is just sort of scanning. I mean, this is why it's so improbable. It should be scanning the entire makeup, the atomic makeup of everything in the box, right? And knows where to stop. I mean, or there's some analog version of this that just gets it like a TV emission, as the metaphor that's used here, gets it close enough, right?
Yeah.
The fidelity is close enough that, okay, whatever. Probably something living would still die, right, with that level of fidelity, but no, okay. But it's scanning inside things, right? Otherwise, the guinea pig would die instantly, right? It's not simply producing the surface of things. So, it's some machine that's doing this, and that should be a sort of like automatic scanning effect. Yet, it seems to know the difference between a person and a fly, And then, but it's got to identify what those are to then mix it.
Yeah.
If it can identify what they are, then why do you think you have to mix them? I don't.
No, this is the
I'm
thing.
not.
Like,
We shouldn't think this much, right?
no, yeah, you're right. It's not designed to be sort of, thought, interrogated to this level. It's not. It just, that's the thing, isn't it? It starts to fall apart. Even in the remake, like, they sort of they recognize this to an extent, because they used to they have that computer where it's sort of like it does the rendering of an image of what it is, whether it be one of the baboons or whether it be whatever they are, and then Brundle, and then it shows the fly. And it sort of combines them. It makes a decision in and of itself. It's just, well, I was told there was one item in here, so one item will come out of it. That was the point. Like we're traversing one thing. But and at least one of the things. What's interesting is they both this version, the 58 version, and the 86 version, highlight a failure. In very, very different ways. Like obviously in this case you have the cat that is just like just doesn't turn up, and then he's sort of like left to sort of float in the ether. So like, is it like some consciousness that is now floating around there, sort of meowing and stuff? And obviously in the remake they have the gibbon or whatever it is. I forget which type of ape it is, but he has a thing and it doesn't work. It's like it's inside out, or it hasn't been reformatted correctly. You just sort of see the bloody stump thing come out.
Yeah.
And so they want to show that this thing is dangerous. They want to show that the science isn't perfect. But unfortunately, sometimes those imperfections, or showing those imperfections, then sort of leads you to the more question, because it then highlights you. Okay, cool. How have you solved that? Like, okay, there's some. I know there's a couple of lines given to it in the 86 version where Brundle sort of says something about matter or something being alive, and he didn't tell the machine that it was alive, and that's why it didn't work. Which, but it makes no sense. But but in this, he just sort of goes, tweaks a few things. He says, "Well, I redesigned." He actually says, "I redesigned the machine." That sounds like a lot of work.
Right. And in what sense?
Yeah.
I mean, you redesigned the machine. Are you talking about the apparatus? Clearly, there are bigger booths, but that doesn't change the underlying technology.
No. So yeah, this is the thing. As I said, we shouldn't reinterrogate it to this level. It's not the technology is not. The science isn't designed to be interrogated to this level, and just doesn't hold up. However, like I say, it is fun to think about. One thing I was curious about, because obviously, I want to throw this in because this is it's almost like the relationship dynamic of what is going on, and they obviously want to have because Vincent Price is in this. Like, this is bandied around as a Vincent Price film. It's up there, it was one of his sort of his horror oeuvre kind of thing, one of his early ones. This is the same year as the Tingler. And so what's interesting is like he plays such a small part in this, but also like, even the character of Francois, like you see that you have how genial and sort of like likable sort of Andre is as this sort of obsessive scientist. Francois seems to hang around the family just waiting for him to die so he can move in on his wife's on his his brother's family. Because even the detective, the inspector, at one point says like well, it's clear that you love Helene, and he's like, yes, I do, but it's my brother's wife. And the inspector even said, well, you were our first suspect.
Right. Yeah, I quite like that.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's laid up. But yeah, it is. In doing so, it does kind of highlight like he's there as this sort of like benevolent uncle and all this other stuff, but like more of a father figure to Philippe than his own father. But it never goes anywhere, so it's kind of frustrating. They have this almost like a love triangle, but not. It's it doesn't really create enough drama for me. I was like, if you're going to have something where,
I see what you mean, right? It doesn't find the meat of that. That's just kind of like the background stuff, and it's there to kind of give the film a happy ending too, right? Because at the end he is there and he is essentially the new dad, Right. My brother died, and he died kind of nobly. Uh, Francois says he was searching for truth, but for him it was careless.
Yeah.
Like my lionized great brother. He was such a great scientist. Well, those days are over, and now you've got a more caring dad. Um, and they sort of walk off together at the end. So it's sort of a happy ending.
It is. It is a weirdly right. Let's talk about the ending because I have a version of this film that
Mm,
as a Vincent Price movie that I wanted. That watching it
okay.
this time, I was like, I want that version. So the end of this film is Helene has given her recounting of the events that led up to the press, and you find out how she actually um, assisted in his suicide. Like she's very right. She's not a murderess. Like it's an assisted suicide, sort of thing. In the press, it's done. It's done. I kind of like the way it's done. I think that there's a moment she just does the head and she's missed the arm.
Mm-hmm.
And when the press goes up, like the body slumps, and I was a bit like, "Oh,
Mm.
that's cool. Like, there's a good little." And she puts the arm in and redoes it. That's why it's done twice. So I was like, "Cool, all right, I'm getting that. That's fantastic." Um, Having seen the head and the arm, though, once they lift that press up, like it should be, there should at least
Mm.
be something behind it. They'd be like, "That's not a human head."
Mm.
But besides the point, so she's given.
Well, I mean, if it depends what the force is, right? If it's crushed to perfectly flat,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
but then there's not enough blood, right? I mean, then
Yeah.
you have the problem like it's a 50s movie. I want to see that Cronenberg body horror stuff, right?
Oh, look, I thought about the Terminator as well, like the
Yes.
ending of the first Terminator film. I was like, oh, that's very sort of like clearly taken. That's very cool. But then obviously, like she's told that she explains to them that Francois and the inspector in the room, and they're like, okay, thank you very much, and they leave. And Francois's like, look, it's true. Like, you have to accept it. Like, this is, is she mad? Like, she can't be mad. And the inspector says, like, find me the fly. I will believe you. Oh, it might be the doctor. I can't remember. Like, find me the fly. That will make me believe.
Mhm.
And then so Francois leaves, and he's a bit, perturbed and upset. And he's sat on this bench, and all of a sudden you just hear this, "Help me! Help me!" And you see there's a large spider's web next to it. And as they're sort of going to leave, they hear it, and the little boy says, "Oh, there's the fly." He's seen it, so he's looking for it. And you see the sort of human head and arm attached to this fly thing, trapped in a spider's web, and the spider getting closer. And I was like, again, that spider effect that they've done is very good. Like I really enjoy that because it gets very close. Like it's really close up. And just so that and this is the spider goes in to eat him, and then the inspector and everything, or the doctor, it's the inspector,
Yeah.
having now seen it, picks up a rock and squashes them both.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's good about this before we get to how you want to rewrite this and improve this, which will no doubt be fascinating. But I do want to say that, at first Vincent Price doesn't hear it. And we hear it and we see it and he walks away and we have the sort of we don't see the close up with a head and arm of a human, but we see the sort of like white out put on a fly's head, right? So we know that's the fly and it's about to get eaten, and we know that's the brother somehow, right? So there is this kind of like existential horror and of the fly being destroyed, but also something I quite love, which is the unseen, right? The audience sees this and has a horror that Francois doesn't. But then later, Francois, you have the problem of Philippe, the son, has seen this, and it's just like, yeah, that I know where that fly is. It's about to be eaten.
Yeah.
It was like very strange, right? You'd think that he would have said something or saved the fly or whatever. And then having heard this, Francois's immediate response is to run up to the inspector instead of like, that's my brother. The woman I love, my sister-in-law is about to go to jail or a mental institution. I need to run out there immediately and rescue this fly. Instead, he runs upstairs the opposite direction to the inspector. I found that fascinating and very strange. And then, of course, they go out and see it, and the inspector crushes the fly. And, Francois has a wonderful line, which is like, you realize you've done exactly what Alain did, right?
Yes.
You have smashed one of these two hybrid forms. You're as guilty as she is. And then they concoct sort of Chinatown style to cover this up, which is quite, this is all good stuff, right?
Oh,
With the
it's
exception
great.
of, running to the inspector to
Yeah.
make the plot work.
Yeah, if he was there, it would be a lot easier, sort of thing. But I love it all. I do think the ending is really, really good. And I think you said there's two tones to the horror. That, like you said, I agree, that existential dread of like that. It's like that. One of my greatest fears is being dropped into the middle of the ocean on my own and drowning a lot. Drowning there alone. Just that knowing that there's no one there to save you, and you're eventually going to tire and drown. Like that terrifies me. The unknown sort of thing. And it's the same thing as well. Being trapped in a spider's web, knowing this fly is about to, drain you of all your internal fluids and eat you, but no one's going to see it. No one's going to sort of like is there to help you. It's just horrible. And then to see the spider coming on him and stuff, it's done very well. Like it is really, I really enjoy this. Let's get. Do you mind if I sort of just give my
let's go
slight
for it.
twist on this? I'm very used to Vincent Price being the villain in many cases. Now in the 50s, he was still sort of he played hundreds of roles, like or tens at least, or different kinds of things. But I always like Vincent Price as sort of like the villain. Everything from like House of Wax, even through to sort of like House on Haunted Hill. Like I love that sort of suave campiness that you get. And in this, he's playing that very benevolent uncle, the brother of the family is there as sort of like the benefactor and all sort of stuff. What I would want is you don't see Helene leaving the compactor at the beginning. You just find the body. You just find the body, and so it's more of a murder mystery. Like who did this to Andre? Like we're not suspecting the wife. It could be, there's multiple suspects. Have it like as a proper murder mystery to be found. And then what I'd like to see, what I would have is when you finally get the flashback, and I would still have Helene retell it or retail this thing, so it's from her perspective. I would actually have it that both her and Francois are aware of the disaster, of the accident that's happened, and eventually, it would be that this almost like Francois is basically the villain, and he then sees this as his opportunity to get Helene.
Right.
But he doesn't want to be sort of like the true villain of this piece. And so it's actually him that starts to manipulate both Helene and the fly Andre to reach the conclusion is there's no answer to this.
You have to kill yourself.
You need to be destroyed, and all this other stuff.
Right.
And he sort of has manipulated this situation so that that's what happens. I mean, you could still have Helene be the suspect. But then at the end, what I'd have is him sat there, sort of like him, and when he looked worried, is that thing of like that fly might still be out there. Not that's going to take revenge. I don't think this sort of minuscule,
right?
But like the evidence is still sort of there, and then him seeing the fly in the web, in the spider's web, and like, help me, and actually sort of acknowledging it. And then walking away. And then going to set up this family, because you said exactly the same ending, sort of like setting up this family. And even then you can have sort of like Helene saying sort of like, what do you think will happen? There's clearly this other one, what do you think will happen? And he's like, oh, well, you never know. It's a dangerous world out there or something like, I almost want him to be the villain of the piece, but sort of, getting away with it.
Yeah, I think that's quite good, and I sort of saw where you were going to go there. I think that I felt some of that just watching it for the first time, and sort of thinking not so much because of Vincent Price. I mean, who I think, I've seen him in so much, and he's sort of like fun to watch, but he's not a great actor, and he's sort of like a bit of a weak point here. But it's fun he's always fun to watch. He's one of those actors who it's like, yeah, I don't know that he's a good actor, but I'm down to watch a Vincent Price movie, sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I did sort of feel even the first time through, like, you know, has he found the fly and killed the fly? I mean, partially because he does lie. He does lie to, you know, his beloved Ellen to get her to confess. He says, "Oh yeah, I've got the fly," and she sort of, not having any proof, says, "Oh, okay, well then I'll tell you the truth. You know, you've seen it already." She assumes, and then he says, I never had it. Right? I've lied to you, and you're going to a mental institution.
Yeah.
So the only problem with what you've got is there's got to be a slight rewrite to have the cop on his own without seeing the fly decide, you know, oh, she's remanded into your care or something, right? You know, and if you really want to push in the Vincent Price evil sort of thing, then you have Vincent Price say, you know, you have Francois sort of hold it over Ellen, you know, and say like, well, you know, you sound. She says like, I wonder, you know, if he's out there, and you know, I hope you wouldn't do anything to him. And he says, now, you know, that sounds very crazy. I'm sure the inspector, you know, can't let the inspector know that you're having that kind of thought. And you sort of realize, yeah, he's basically killed his brother twice, and also, you know, has this woman living in fear.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'd like that. I think you know that slight twist of Vincent Price being somewhat of the not somewhat like an out and out villain. I think would be quite good fun. Actually, it would be a different film. I think it would be a very different film. But you know, that's not to say I don't like what we get, because I do. I actually really enjoy this film. I think it works. It works very well, actually. I think it works. You know. One of the things we've done as we've looked at these things is we've obviously made some, you know, we need to make some comparisons. Really, you know, we talked about, obviously we did the sequel to Godzilla, and so this is a sort of the original, comparing it to '86. They're two very different films in the way they approach things. You know, obviously '86 is much about the body horror, and then Cronenberg brings all kinds of grossness to it. But it still, and if anything, actually, there's a character in the second one who is her editor, is Gina Davis's editor. It's clearly almost like the Vincent Price kind of character. It's exactly what I've just said. It's almost like the Vincent Price character. But you still get the sacrifice at the end of the, you know, the Fly 86 and you know, all those bits. And they are two very different eras. But like, you know, I don't want to say which is better, but like, you know. But one of the things I was intrigued by, actually, as I watched this, is for '58. You know, we watched obviously The Tinkler, which is way more into sort of like, it's a bit silly, and it's designed to be a sort of Castle film.
William Castle.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so it's designed to be like, you know, buzz seats and all that kind of stuff. But I was surprised how, like, by the time you get to this, like, this film is a proper like horror. Like, they're leading into sort of like some of that stuff, and I was actually really impressed.
I mean, you know, it's really a sort of monster movie. You know, whereas, yeah, it sort of reflects, both of them are sci-fi horror, right? I mean, but this sort of reflects, you know, as many of the 1950s sci-fi movies, even the ones that we've covered, do, a kind of, you know, the monster era, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So The Fly is essentially, you know, a new sort of Jekyll and Hyde, Frankenstein, you know, Dracula. I mean, you know, he's clearly that sort. There's that influence there. Whereas in the Cronenberg one, which I do think is better, although I like both of them in different ways, the Cronenberg one is coming from a sort of darker place of 1980s horror, and obviously is very, you know, in terms of the relationships, is very keen to distance itself from the 1950s depiction of femininity, with Helen's perfect composure almost, you know, and dutifully serving her scientist husband. Um, and I think it changes everything to have the scientist not be married, right?
Mm. Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think when you look at, if you were to take sort of Andre and put him against Seth Brundle, yeah, they have that same sort of obsession, and that recklessness, that we see with the cat in the 58 version. But like you say, it's much more accentuated in the 86 version. Like Brundle is way more sort of like impatient. He becomes more impatient and stuff. And if anything, I actually think sort of like with the Brundle fly with 86, like they really lean into the idea of sort of not so much science gone too far, but like scientists out of control. Like he's almost like he is a victim of his own hubris. That's sort of the point. And it's that's sort of what builds up in that film. That's less so in 58 because he's obviously a bit more genial and sort of like I'm a happy husband and a good father, and that sort of thing.
He's a leading man, whereas
Yeah,
Jeff
exactly.
Goldblum is not. I mean,
Yeah.
Jeff Goldblum is a weirdo who
Yes.
can't ask about your apartment in a commercial without seeming absolutely bizarre and weird and creepy, and that's
Yeah.
part of the appeal of Jeff Goldblum. But I like what you're saying about sort of that context of that hubris, because it's also true that in 58 the scientist is he's part of a company, and the company is the Delombra company, right? But we don't really know what that company produces, right? Except that
Nope.
it's got a factory and it's got a press, right? So there is this sort of like very pleasant depiction of capitalism going on, right?
Yeah.
That, golly gee, capitalism is like, the smiling face on the poster, a sort of you read your Newsweek and you see David Hedison as, Andre Delambre, the smiling future of someone's, plastics or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Whereas by the time you get to the 86 one, capitalism is being questioned. Not just, the 50s version of femininity is out the window, but this idea that, like, right, everybody with money, every company is filled with upstanding men who are,
Yeah.
great fathers and, deserve their place. And instead, it's like, well, no, I've got this money, but I'm a weird inventor. Money is still a problem, is an issue there. And there is this cult of celebrity of Gina Davis's character meeting him to interview him, to try to land this interview, which is a very different kind of culture, celebrity culture, than anything we see here.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point, actually. 'Cause, I mean, the thing to highlight is that, I mean, the cast in both is very small. I mean, this is the 1958 being a very self-contained film. The only time it leaves the house is to go to the ballet. The factory is literally out their back door, which is weird in and of itself. It's a very small film. The majority of the film takes place either in the house or in the basement. Like that's every now and then you see sort of Francois' office, but it could easily just be in the factory next door. Like it's all very contained.
Or the yard,
Yeah. There's just all sort of around the house. And yet, like you say, with the 86 version, although it is still a very small film, it's got a very self-contained thing. The objective is different because really, what it's like, there's always this push for exposure. Like she's a journalist. She's going to the editor of this magazine. She wants to take photos. She wants to make him famous. Like it's trying to be a bigger thing. Whilst sort of the 58 version is more of a sort of like a family horror drama. There's almost like an exploitation level to the 86 version. About, like you say, about celebrity, about becoming famous, and about sort of like I think there's even a line in it about him, being on the front of Time magazine or something like that. So
Hmm.
there is that sort of credibility that must be given to this character. So yeah, they've got very different agendas, or very different sort of like the ways that they view things. But I also think that comes to the end of the film as well. When it comes to the end of the film, I suppose it's the way they sort of go about things. But in the 58 version, it's very much about protecting his family. He literally starts fighting his own arms to protect his wife, and as you said, that conclusion of suicide comes about very quickly, which is fine.
And he does write on the blackboard, like, "Don't come near me," right?
Yeah.
And like underlines it, right?
Yeah,
Because he's a threat.
Yeah, he knows he's becoming dangerous. With the 86 version, like, it actually sort of culminates at one point when she finds out she's pregnant, she's going for an abortion. Like, he literally comes and gets her. Like, he kidnaps her from the abortion center, the doctors. And you're a bit like, and he is going to make her go through the pods. Like, he's going to force her to go through the pods. Now, I don't know if it's going to be with him. I think he is, isn't he? He's going to blend all three of them together.
Right.
That's right. And so there's
that's his solution is, because there's no possibility of like finding the original fly and going through again and hoping for the best, right? So I did kind of miss that as an escalation, right? There's some place to go with his threat, right, in the Goldblum.
A slightly different way of having a nuclear family, isn't it? Like,
yes.
Just in one body.
I can't help but point out half of America would be cheering now for going and getting her to, force her to give birth.
Yes. Maybe one day we'll cover The Fly too, and we actually get to see that birth. But yeah, it's just interesting, like I say, that they take that scientist factor, that idea, and obviously that lack of that losing of humanity and the desperation, and where it becomes a sort of like an instant sacrificial act in the 58 version of like, well, that's my answer. Like, Brundle goes through a couple before he sort of reaches the conclusion of like, no, I've sort of reached my final evolution. You better blow my brains out, sort of thing.
It's almost spontaneous that he sort of, he's decayed. He never gets a speech where he reverses himself and says, "Oh, you need to kill me." He just lifts the shotgun to his head at the end. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to live like this anymore.
Yeah,
I recognize.
This isn't as cool as I thought. I didn't get wings. It actually kind of sucks. Yeah, it's interesting, sort of like you say, that there's more of a cynicism in the 86 version. Sort of, which I kind of like, and I always like that, especially about 80s films. That sort of often remembered as being this sort of like neon coated pop bubblegum sort of like most of cinema, and then you get a film and you're like, oh no, like there was a real sort of seedy underbelly to all this, and so I like that. I like the fact that they are so that they're so so opposing in that way.
Well, it's funny. I was watching something about tests about human nature, and what percentage of people, if you tell them, they go to a hotel and you tell them, you make sure they overhear right at the front desk, like, "Oh, really? There's a guest who's left the money in a suitcase in a room. We'll look for that right away." And then, of course, there's the suitcase in their room. Some people bring it back, but almost nobody does. And, then they run out and dispose of the suitcase, they in one way or another. And so it seems like the 50s version, and, it is trying to live in a world in which everybody would return that money, right?
Yes.
And realizing that you have become a horrible monster, of course you do the right thing. And, you think of your family. And I don't even know that it's the right thing. I mean, it's so moralistic that it's like, he's seen too many Frankenstein films. It's just like, yeah, the science is bad. right? I've
But
gone
not
too
even.
far.
It's not even. It's not just Andre. Is it? You said like Andre is this sort of like you say is this ideal of the mad scientist, but like even his beloved brother Francois is sort of like so dedicated to his brother. Sort of like he may love his wife, but he's never going to do anything about it. I'll just be there as the and then his wife that is dedicated to him. It's all this like you say this technicolor sort of like morality is yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a child. I mean, think about the role of children between the two. I mean, to end my thought, there's just the '80s version has that cynicism, right? We don't buy that anymore. The '80s version is like, right, everybody takes the money,
Well, the '80s version goes further. I think, like you said, the '50s version, returns the suitcase with all the money. The '80s version goes out, buys a bunch of drugs, and then uses the suitcase to sort of do the lines on. Like that's how dark I think some of the '80s films got.
Or uses the suitcase to bash somebody, or instantly takes that money and uses it to exploit somebody else, right? It's not just about having a good time yourself. It's interesting the role of children between the two, that children are part of that 1950s dream, right? And it's interesting this is sort of more secluded than a suburban dream, but it's not it's specifically not an urban setting. Whereas in the 80s, it is an urban setting. It's New York, and the child is a hypothetical child. It's a pregnancy, right? So, I mean, it is astounding the difference it makes to a character and also to people in real life, whether they're parents or not, right? And being a scientist who's not a parent, who's just a swinging Jeff Goldblum single, in New York, is very different than this 50s depiction of everybody wants to be parents and every woman wants to have children and just be married to a good man who neglects her most of the time, but that's okay. You have a maid.
Exactly. Yeah, it is. It's that it was almost the American dream, is it? Like his intelligence. His scientific know-how has allowed them. He's got the scientific know-how. His brother's got the business know-how, and they've built this business together.
What's fucked up is, I mean, that was my father's generation, right? I mean, he became a professor, and his father neglected him, but he neglected us in turn. And I mean, his attitude was, I mean, he was better than his dad, but his attitude was like, right, I'm paying for all of this, right?
Yeah.
I don't hit you. Of course I don't love you and I don't have conversations. I don't say I love you, but I mean, and I don't have conversations with you ever about anything, but I don't hit you.
Yeah.
I'm paying for this and I'm smart, like I'm accomplished. What more do you want? I saw The Fly and I was told that was doing pretty good. And today we're like, that is an abusive husband. Like, have a fucking conversation.
And that's true, isn't it? Like you said, that's the thing about, like you say, aspirations and social acceptance of what it is that you can actually do is so vastly different. I mean, we watched a lot of those '50s films, with the last season and how he did that whole '50s block, and it was clear in there that sort of like the depiction of the man's man, who sort of like often the hero protagonist of those films, and often those things we said about sort of like the daughter of the professor or whatever was always in there, and those kinds of things. So yeah, it is. It's an odd thing of how the '50s set this idea of like and the nuclear family was obviously a big thing in sort of in the and family and stuff was a big thing in the '50s.
You know what's fascinating is another thing that I recently saw was all these outtakes from old movies, and
the bloopers.
Yeah, the bloopers.
I've seen that. Yeah.
The second they screw up, they're like, motherfucker, saying the most invective they possibly can. And the point is, right, I mean, and we know from data, everybody in the 50s was having abortions at the same rate as they do now. They were having gay sex at the same rate that they do now. They were using drugs at the same rates that they do now. We give a couple percentage points. I mean, this is in human nature. All of this stuff that we're watching in the 50s is all consciously crafted lies.
Oh yes.
I mean, they know this is not the way that
Yeah.
families are. This is not the way women are. This is not the way men are. And yet, this is what America wanted to be true, and wanted to present itself as, to distort and hurt the next generation into thinking that should be normal. And of course, you're wrong if you deviate from that depiction of normal.
Which is why you end up with the counterculture of the 60s. That complete swing in the other way. Which, as you said, is less of a swing when you realise that a lot of the stuff, yes, what you're doing in outdoors was sort of going on indoors anyway. So it's just sort of, you just sort of brought it out into the open. Yeah, you're right though. It is very interesting how these two in fact, there's an interesting double feature here to watch these two back to back. I think The Fly and the 58 and 86, just to see how that those sort of things would be so different. But yeah, I mean, that's it. We're coming to time really. So any final thoughts? Any final thoughts for The Fly 1958?
I was pleasantly pleased by this, and I think what has been most clear to me is, the things that's most referred to about this, and that you've mentioned and other friends have mentioned, is the, sort of help me, and the ridiculous shot, which I think, for the time is fine, of the fly with a human head. And I mean, this is what everybody references. And the truth is, that's fine. It's an FX shot. But, it's a perfectly adequate, perfectly fine film from its era. It holds your attention more than a lot of other films. And so I was pretty pleased with it. At the same time, I think it's interesting that you can see how somebody would think, I'd like to remake this. That,
yes.
Not just with what you've described about, the other potential additional twists that could be done with this, but there is real potential here that is unrealized, and there is real possibility for updating too. So
that's a point because I think I want to sort of touch on a similar point you said there. But like you said, I'm the same. I really enjoy this film. Like, it's badged as a Vincent Price film. He's in it. Like I like Vincent Price. I enjoy Vincent Price movies. This is not really a Vincent Price vehicle. Like he's in it, but it's more about sort of like the other characters. But that's fine. Like I like the way it's done. I think I like the structure, as you said. The fact it's going to give you that mystery to begin with. It's not going to lay it all out, and it has sort of several reveals and twists along the way, which I just really enjoy. I thought it was a good film. It's it keeps your attention. I'm not unsatisfied at the end. I'm like, yeah, this is good. I think it's a well done film. It's dated in many respects, as we've sort of highlighted, but taken in the era that it was made and what it is, I thought it's a pretty solid film. I can see why it sort of stood up. I can also, as you say, see why it stood up as being the potential to be remade. Now, obviously, this isn't we've done The Fly and The Fly, but we should also note there was the Return of the Fly and The Curse of the Fly, so this wasn't sort of like a one-off. This had two sequels. Like it managed to make money and it did well. So the 86 version had The Fly 2 as well. But I like this idea you said, not just about remaking it, but recontextualizing it, adapting it, and modernizing it. Or even just doing something different. Like I recently did on Sister Podcast 20th Century Geek a comparison of The Thing from Outer Space, versus a 50s film, and The Thing, the John Carpenter film, and it's a similar thing. It's sort of going, okay, well, the Thing from Outer Space is very much a 50s sort of like monster movie. It's got ideas in there, and then obviously John Carpenter came along and was like, I want to go back to the original story and I want to give it a modern twist. I can put a different context into this. And the same with what Cronenberg did. He was like, I could do this thing of, that thing. I'm sure they could do something similar, like an 80s movie. But no, he was like, no, we're going to go a different way. And I'm going to have a different tone. I'm going to do this, but like I'm going to keep that idea. And so I actually think, just as a final note, I think this is a really good idea of when we look at remakes, that thing of like, people say, I'll start making remakes. And you go like, well, only if you're going to give it that modernization, if you're going to recontextualize it and say something different, then actually sometimes it can be really worthwhile. And I think it can be really successful. So,
well, this and The Thing are two classic examples of very different remakes that are rated generally higher than the original.
yes, yeah, there aren't many, but I think there might be some others sort of like kicking about out there, but have to sort of maybe come across one day.
And furthermore, on that point, it does argue that remake, that director, right, have a new idea, right?
Yes,
go a
totally.
new direction. You don't have to be faithful to the original. Our job as the audience is just to wait until that actually comes out, right? Because you don't know, I mean, you could just hear the pitch and you'll think, yeah, that sounds horrible, right? But wait until it actually comes out. Jeff Goldblum is, that sounds horrible. But wait until it actually comes out, and hopefully it'll be a strong interpretation. And if it's bad, by all means, we can say it's bad, but don't condemn the entire concept of reinterpreting these things.
Yeah, again, because we're now in a different time. I'm not saying remake The Fly again. Most definitely not. But there are films I think that you could go back from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, or whatever, and go, okay, we've gone through a lot now. Time to reinterpret this film for a different generation, for a different era, and see what we can make. I think there's plenty that could be done. Anyway, that's it. I think we've addressed that. So that's The Fly from 1958. But we're not done. Obviously, we're still very early on in our season. And just so you know, the next film is Alphaville from 65.
Yeah, Jean-Luc Godard.
Yeah, so we're jumping from the 50s into the 60s. We're going through these decades. We've done the 30s, done the 40s, done the 50s. Now we're getting into the 60s. We really are sort of getting through these, and some fantastic films. So next episode, yes, we're doing Alphaville. Go and find it and check it out before we. I've never watched it, by the way. So it's a French film, and so it shall be interesting to see.
It feels like a French film. It'll be interesting to see what you think.
That's an interesting.
I make you watch these, like, all right, you're going to watch 3 hours of Russian cinema. Like,
one day they'll get to one and you'll be like, it feels like a Lithuanian film. I'm like, I don't even know what that means. Like, yeah, I know what you mean when you say it feels like a French film, but I'm looking forward to it. I am. It's going to be interesting. But we've got so much more to come. We've got so much more to come. For those that often, one of the things we have heard is we do a lot of stuff, but there'll be some big names coming up as well. You'll recognise and you'll enjoy. But anyway, so ladies and gentlemen, join us for the next episode. But Julian, thank you very much for joining me as always to talk about The Fly.
Always my pleasure. I love doing this with you, and I love thinking about these films in a different way from your perspective, and the ways that we agree and disagree. It's just fascinating. Yeah,
that's it. We when we sort of have those slightly varying ideas, I think that's when the great discussions happen. We'll see what discussions we have over Alphaville. Let's see. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, if you're enjoying what we do, I'm really want to hammer this home. If you like what we do, go leave us a review. Seriously, it takes a couple of minutes. Go find your podcast catcher. Just leave a review on there. Preferably 5 stars, but if not 5 stars, just go on and leave us a review. We want the feedback. We want to understand. Go and talk to us. Find us on social media at PodTime Space, PODTIME space SPACE. We're on there. I'm going to put a link down below. We've got the bit link and all that kind of things. Go find us on social media. Come and tell us, are you enjoying these films? What do you think about the selection we've made for season 4? It's on there now. Is it good? Is it bad? Are we, what other things do you think we should review? What other films do you think should be remade? Do you have an interpretation of a film? Tell us, the other 50s films that you think should be remade or reinterpreted. Let us know. But if you really, really like what we're doing as well, you're having a taster of some of the stuff we are doing out on the Patreon, because in between these main feed or these main movie episodes, we are now releasing Trekking Through the Twilight Zone. So these are sort of like bite-sized chunks we're doing, that Julian and I are doing, each episode of the Twilight Zone. So you're now going to be getting them on the main feed every 2 weeks. However, if you like those, go check out our Patreon. And for just £5, I think it's a couple of dollars, $6 a month, you get first 2 seasons worth. So what's that? That's like what, almost 60 episodes?
Yeah.
Of trekking through so almost 60 episodes of trekking through the Twilight Zone. We've been releasing them week in, week out for almost like 60 weeks, for quite a while, and they will always be released weekly on the Patreon and fortnightly on the main feed. So you will never, well, you might eventually, but they will, as the Patreon, you will always get additional material. There's so much more on there as well, other podcasts and stuff. So please go check out. There's a link down below. Greatly appreciate it. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, and Julian, thank you very much, and we shall see you in Alphaville.